Hello, my Nevermore Hollow psychos. This is Lafayette Faust. Tonight, I will present to you an episode of The Dead of Night with Darwin Gallows. This is one of our offerings over on our Patreon site. You get one of these Dead of Night episodes every month, along with character dossiers, autopsy reports on the strange cryptids that haunt the town, and other behind-the-scenes content. We put a lot of effort into producing high-quality horror and horror comedy, and if you would like to support our efforts, well, maybe you should consider signing up on our Patreon page, or you can buy us a coffee. The links are in the show notes. We love our fans, and we love what we do, and every little bit helps us to continue to give the stories that are fun and filled with characters you love and monsters that scare you. If you can't support us in that way, you can always like, comment, and more importantly, share Nevermore Hollows with everyone you know. Thank you so much for listening. Now, I invite you to sit back, turn on a light, and prepare yourself. Hello, my Nevermore Hollow psychos. This is your friend, Lafayette Faust. It's been a while, and there's been much that has happened that I will soon get around to telling you. But first, I need to give you a little background on tonight's story. The Dog is a story that takes place between two other ones I've already told. The first story is The Black Parade, and the second is Dogman, which comes directly after this one. The events in this story will make a little more sense if you listen to The Black Parade first. Of course, you don't have to if you don't want to, but hey, what else are you going to do on a nice, dark night when the cicadas and the crickets are singing? Doom scroll? What benefit do you get out of that? None. The only thing that doom scrolling accomplishes is to steal those precious minutes of your life that should be spent in more joyful endeavors. And as I've said before, I understand the value of your time, and I take it very seriously that you are spending those precious moments with me here at Nevermore Hollows. My promise to you is that I will continue to do my best to build a universe filled with horror stories like you won't find anywhere else. Thank you for giving me your time, and in return, I offer you this dark vignette that gives you a surprising backstory to one of our most beloved characters. So with that all being said, I invite you to sit back, turn on a light, and prepare yourself. Stupid was a dog. As with most dogs, he could understand human language to a degree that allowed him to interact and bond with humans more intimately than other species of domesticated pets. Having this ability, he knew that the word stupid was not a good word. He knew it was a bad word because whenever his last master called him this, the word was full of hate and usually followed by a kick or a punch or something being thrown at him. His master was a man named Daryl. He was fat, loud, angry, and always smelled like beer. He had owned Stupid since he was a puppy, and many times Stupid wanted to leave him, but Stupid stayed. He stayed in part because he didn't realize that life was anything else than what it was, which was the physical pain of being hit and kicked, and the worst pain of not knowing why. He also stayed because he didn't want Daryl to be alone. Stupid was sad for Daryl because he didn't have any other pets or humans to share life with. Stupid didn't know why he cared so much for Daryl, but he did. So he endured the pain and loved Daryl anyway. Stupid had come to accept that this would be his life forever. That was until a week ago when he left Daryl and traveled 100 miles to this new place, which was called Nevermore Hollows. The beatings and the hate he had received from Daryl was not why he had left, though. Stupid left because he had been visited by a shining man and told to come to this new place. The shining man glowed. A lot. That's why Stupid thought of him as the shining man. It wasn't like his skin or his clothes glowed. Instead, it was a light that radiated out of him and surrounded him. And the shining man was scary, but not in a bad way. What made him scary was hard to define. But when the shining man had spoken to Stupid, he had used the word righteous. Stupid had never heard this word before, but when the shining man spoke it, Stupid knew it was the thing that made the man scary, but in a good way. The shining man told Stupid that righteous meant a special kind of goodness, a goodness that gave you power. It was a goodness that made you brave and strong. The shining man had told him that he was a good dog, a dog that had endured much suffering and had stayed loyal, and because of that, Stupid was also righteous. And because he was righteous, the shining man was going to send him on a mission. He told Stupid that this was a very important mission. He said that this mission was going to be very scary and that he was going to have to be brave because it would help save many lives. He told Stupid to come to this town called Nevermore Hollows and find a man with a black shirt with a bright red cross on it. This man's name was Templar, and he would tell Stupid the details of his mission. During his 100-mile-long travel, Stupid had indeed seen very scary things. The first scary thing was a bear. Stupid had been traveling along the side of the road. He'd wandered off into the woods to find a place to sleep for the night. He was padding down a trail when a big black bear came lumbering along from the other direction. The bear stood up on its hind legs, making it tall and terrible. It roared so loud that it made Stupid shake. Then the bear rushed at Stupid. The bear chased him for a long time until Stupid ran into a clearing in the woods. The bear stopped at the edge of this clearing, and it made a whining sound as if it was now the one that was scared. Though Stupid couldn't understand why something as big and mean as this bear could be scared. Suddenly, the bear cried out, turned, and ran away. Stupid was so relieved. He stood a few yards into the clearing, looking in the direction the bear had run. He was panting, catching his breath, letting his heart stop beating so hard. Then it got really cold. So cold that Stupid started shivering again. From behind him, he heard a flutter of wings and a child's voice say, "Look, little one, a dog." Stupid turned. It was now full-on night. The clearing was lit with a pale glow of the full moon. In the center of the clearing was a boy. Stupid didn't understand time like humans did and didn't know how old the boy was. But he was small, not much bigger than the little girl who had lived next to Daryl. Stupid had overheard the girl's mother call her a toddler. This boy was a little bigger than the girl, but maybe he was a toddler too. This boy was the second scary thing Stupid encountered. And there was a crow that stood on the ground beside him. This crow was the third scary thing. It was large for a crow, and its beak was sewn shut with thick black string, but its eyes seemed to burn with white heat. The crow glared at Stupid. The boy held up his left hand and gave a little wave. "My name is Nix," he said. He motioned at the crow beside him. "The little one here is my friend. His name is Hades." Though his words were wholesome, his tone was wrought. Stupid heard the meanness, and when a slight breeze skittered across the moonlit clearing, he caught a whiff of something foul. It was the hate that he had felt from his old master, but worse. The hate coming off Nix and Hades was so powerful that Stupid could feel it close around him like a giant claw. Stupid took a step back on quivering legs. This was so much worse than the scary bear. The bear was just mean, doing what bears do. But this little boy and his bird were evil. The bear wanted to kill and eat Stupid. The boy and the bird wanted to do worse. Stupid couldn't imagine what that could be, but he knew he had to run away. It would be better to fight the bear in the dark woods than to let Nix and Hades do whatever they wanted to do to him. Nix tilted his head and gave a tainted smile. "Let's play." Stupid took a step back on quivering legs. He knew what play was, and he knew in his heart that this scary little boy used that word but meant something evil. He let out a worried whine, then was mad at himself for doing so. On an instinctual level, he knew that he shouldn't show fear in this terrifying moment. So, midway through the whine, he turned it into a warning bark. Nix took 2 steps forward. Hades gave 2 hops and a flutter of wings. "Don't you want to play with us?" Nix said. Stupid's heart was pounding. He felt cold. He shivered. His mind raced. Run, run, run. But he was too afraid to turn his back on them. And there was the possibility that the bear was still beyond the circle of the clearing, waiting, watching, still hungry and eager to kill. "I can see you want to run away," Nix said. "Maybe Hades can convince you to play with us." Nix leaned down and pulled on the knot that secured the black sutures. It took only a heartbeat for the sutures to slip free, and then Hades fixed his glowing eyes on Stupid and squawked a single word. "Torture." Stupid knew that word. Daryl used to watch movies where good people were killed by bad people. Sometimes the bad people would do all kinds of hurtful things to the good people before they killed them. This terrible word was used to describe those hurtful things. Stupid had seen and heard enough. He dared to turn his back on them and run into the woods. Just as he did, Nix yelled, "Stop him!" Stupid stopped cold in his tracks. The clearing was now surrounded by dozens of animals. All their eyes glowed with that scary white color, like the eyes of Hades. There were raccoons, deer, squirrels, rabbits, bobcats, and opossums, and every single one of them were dead and in various stages of decomposition. Stupid intuited that these animals had all been played with by Nix and Hades. He didn't want to end up like them. When they didn't attack him, he intuited that they were there to stop his escape so that Nix and Hades could do bad things to him, torture him, then kill him when they were done. The only way out of this was for Stupid to overcome his terror and to fight the boy and his scary bird. Stupid turned away from the dead animals and looked at the boy. He wasn't sure if what he was about to do would work, but he had to try. He planted his paws, dropped his head, and started to growl. It began deep in his chest, his heart hammering in fear, and it rose louder, more defiant, and when it built up through his throat, he threw his head up toward the moon-filled sky and let the growl transform into a long, defiant howl. Hades instinctively took a hop back. Nix stood his ground, though his eyes widened out of surprise. It seemed that he and his crow had never had one of their playthings take such bold action. With the howl still echoing through the dark woods, Stupid mustered up all his courage and charged at Nix. Nix stepped to the side. Hades hopped into flight. As he did, he cried out, "Murder!" Stupid nipped at Nix, who giggled and swatted him on his snout. Hades squawked and pecked at his ear. The swat stung. The peck made his ear bleed. Stupid turned to nip at Hades, but he was too slow. The crow had fluttered into the night sky. Suddenly, Nix had a silver dagger. He jabbed the tip of it into Stupid's side. It was a shallow wound, but it still hurt bad. Stupid gave a sharp bark of pain, then turned and tried to bite Nix's arm. Hades swooped back down and rammed the tip of his beak into the top of Stupid's skull, causing his vision to darken. Stupid nearly passed out, but shook the darkness away and started to turn his attention back on Hades. But suddenly he had a realization. They were keeping him distracted, playing with him. They were having fun. Stupid could only fight one of them at a time. He had to decide quickly which one was the most dangerous. In a flash of understanding, he knew it had to be Nix. He ignored the pain in his skull. He ignored the squawking and the pecks and the nips, and he put all his focus and energy and rage on Nix. He lunged at the boy, snatched his arm, the one holding the dagger, and chomped down. The boy's eyes scrunched in pain. "Ow!" Nix yelled. "No fair! You can't bite!" He used his free hand to punch Stupid's face. It hurt so badly, but Stupid began shaking his head, yanking the boy's body back and forth. Nix dropped the knife. There was a brief moan of pain. Then he jerked his hand free, stepped backward, and his feet got tangled. He fell hard onto his back. Hades kept pecking and hammering at Stupid's neck, head, and back, but Stupid saw his opening. With heart racing, not sure he was going to survive, but knowing he didn't want to be abused any more, especially at the hands of a scary little toddler and his creepy crow, he shot forward and bit down on Nix's exposed throat. Stupid didn't want to kill the boy. He just wanted to not fight anymore and to stop the crow from hurting him. So he did something he had never done in all his life. With the boy's throat in his mouth, he gave a rage-filled growl. Then he squeezed just enough to hopefully scare the boy. Nix spread out his arms, his hands open in surrender. But he surprised Stupid by giggling. Then he said, "Cease, little one." Hades stopped his attack and landed on the ground a few feet away. He stood with white-hot anger pouring from him. Nix then said, "We've never played with anything that showed such restraint. The other playthings fought to live and were willing to kill. They were acting on instinct, but you are different. Isn't he, Hades?" Hades gave a low squawk. Stupid kept his teeth around Nix's neck, but cut his eyes at Hades, making it clear he was now in control. Hades glared at Stupid, but gave a nod. Stupid turned his attention back to Nyx. He gave another warning growl, and Nyx said, "I think we should let him be, Hades. What do you think?" Hades gave a flutter of wings and a derisive cry. "You've been such a fun plaything," Nyx said. "So Hades and I have decided to let you live. For now. We think it should be so much fun to play again when you least expect it." Stupid didn't know whether to trust them or not. Instinct told him to never trust anyone, but it seemed clear that the two of them could have continued fighting and even killed him. And he had never killed anyone, and he really didn't want to now, even though these two were very bad and clearly deserved it. Something deep inside him whispered that letting them go was the right decision, for now, even though it was likely true that Nyx and Hades would at some point in the future cross his path. Besides, the taste of this boy's neck was cold and clammy, and there was no pulse in his neck, and no pulse meant no life, but the boy was clearly alive. This confused Stupid. He didn't know what to make of it, but he knew that more than anything in the world right now he wanted to leave this scary place with the scary boy and the creepy crow and the dead animals. He let go of Nyx's throat and boldly turned away and began walking out of the clearing. Inside he was still trembling. He was scared, but it was different than the fear he felt earlier. It was because he had fought and survived. And this knowledge helped him believe that he could do it again. He felt that this new belief would help him on his mission, too, once he arrived at Nevermore Hollows. He reached the edge of the clearing and stepped between a decaying deer and a bobcat that had been gutted. They turned their milky dead eyes on him and let him pass. Stupid forced himself not to run. He felt that doing that would be wrong, that it would make Nyx and Hades and their dead playthings change their mind and chase him. It was his boldness that mattered now. As he stepped into the darker woods, Nyx called out behind him, "When we play next time, there will be more blood." This statement was followed by a hateful cry from Hades. Stupid walked another 100 yards before he gave in and ran. Neither Nyx nor Hades nor the dead playthings chased him. He made it back to the road and made sure not to venture into the woods for the rest of his journey. 2 more days passed before he arrived in Nevermore Hollows, and during those 2 days he had been attacked 2 more times, once by a man with a machete, the other was a coven of witches. But because he had been able to survive his initial encounter with Nyx and Hades, he had been bolder, more decisive, cleverer in his battles with these enemies. The machete-wielding man had kicked him hard in the ribs and had given him a superficial slice along his left foreleg. It had burned, but after 2 days it was just a scab. The witches had chased him down a lonely stretch of road. They'd been floating, hurtling curses at him. One of them shot a bolt of electricity from her fingertips that had burnt some of his fur on his rump. But he'd been able to escape. It was late evening when Stupid arrived in town, and Main Street was alive with people walking, holding hands, shopping, and dining in the glow of the antique street lamps and candle-colored lights that were strung around the trees that lined the sidewalk. As Stupid padded in front of Pennywise Ice Cream Parlor, suddenly chaos erupted. Some people began choking and clawing at their throats and faces. Others fell and began writhing as if they were in the throes of seizures. Still others dropped their shopping bags and began lurching around as if they were freakish marionettes with wild eyes and foaming mouths controlled by a demented puppeteer. No one took notice of Stupid as he made his way down the street. Those who were not being afflicted by bizarre behavior were either rushing to help those who were, or were taking pictures and video with their cell phones. Stupid knew the cause of this chaos. It was yet another scary person. Just before entering town at the far end of Main Street, Stupid had come too close to a young man dressed in black standing in the red glow of a traffic light. Stupid, being part husky and part border collie with one green eye and one blue, had the sweet nature of both those breeds, as well as a deep empathic ability to sense the evil that radiated from this young man. Even though his last master was mean and angry, and Nyx and Hades were evil, Stupid had never felt anything as dark and hateful as what he felt coming from this young man. A phrase popped into his dog brain. Beware of Jack. He thought that maybe the Shining Man had somehow put this thought into his mind. And though Stupid didn't fully understand what was happening, he knew he had to trust his voice in his head and accept that the young man's name was Jack. Stupid wasn't the scared dog he used to be. He would fight Jack if he had to. But he knew that this warning meant that if he did fight Jack, it would distract him from his mission. Stupid had come too far, was too close to finding the man with the red cross on his chest. He felt an urgency, so he crept off the road and gave Jack a wide berth and had finally made it into town. Stupid padded past a man crawling on all fours in the gutter beside the sidewalk, his face contorted and dark red. A woman and a small child lay on their backs in the middle of the street, twitching and jerking, their eyes showing only whites. He stepped around a teenaged girl sitting on her bottom, legs splayed out in front of her, crying and moaning and pulling large clumps of hair from her scalp. He hopped over an abandoned purse and out into the middle of the street, where he stepped around an older woman who was squatting next to an open manhole. She peered into its darkness while screaming in a guttural language. Stupid didn't like the energy coming from these afflicted people, but he intuited that none of this had anything to do with his mission. He padded along, surrounded by screaming chaos. At one point, he got a strong whiff of pizza, and his mouth began to water. He hadn't eaten much over the past week, only a few scraps he'd found in trash bins, but there was no time for the tasty food. He had to stay on his mission. He padded past the building where the pizza smell was coming from, and then he stopped. Not because of the smell of bread, meats, and sauce, but because all those wonderful smells were suddenly tainted with something. Under the warm smells that made his stomach growl, there was also a smell that made the hair on his back stand up. It smelled like 1,000,000 rotten eggs and sickness and death. He realized this was the smell of evil. It was the same smell that had poured off Nyx and Hades, but this was much stronger. He knew it must be from Jack. He was coming, and he was close. Stupid wanted to tuck his tail between his legs and run as fast as he could away from this town, but he stayed brave. Out in the street, a man was trying to shove his hands inside his mouth and rip out his tongue. The man was wearing a police uniform. Stupid sensed he was close to finding the man with the red cross on his chest. He turned in a slow circle, looking at everyone, and was about to continue down the street on his quest when he picked up an unusual sound coming from the direction he'd just come. He turned and saw Jack twisting, gyrating, jerking, lurching down the center of the street, and he was followed by a parade of demons, all of them writhing and laughing and moaning in glee at the chaos created by their danse macabre. For a moment, Stupid was so horrified that he couldn't move. Finally, he was able to gain control of himself and run to the sidewalk and hide in the shadow of a small alley. When Jack and the demons had moved past him, Stupid crept from the alley and padded down the sidewalk, keeping to the shadows, away from the pale yellow light of the ornate street lamps. He was wary, but able to keep his fear at bay because he kept thinking about the words righteous and brave. He shot cautious glances at the black parade as they contorted themselves down the middle of the street. He was stopped short when a door to one of the shops opened in front of him, and two boys stepped out onto the sidewalk. One of the boys had dusky skin and a mischievous grin. The other was light-skinned and had red hair. They each had a bag of comic books and were headed toward two rusty bikes that were leaning up against the wall. They stopped short when they saw Jack and his demons prancing psychotically down the street. Their eyes shot wide, but not in fear, only in wonder. And then, when they pulled their gaze from the black parade and noticed the stricken townsfolk, the red-haired boy said, "Oh no, we have to help these folks." Stupid wondered why these boys were not affected like the rest of the people on the street. They didn't get sick or start acting weird or scary or foaming at the mouth or speaking in strange languages. Then he got a whiff of something radiating off them. It was clean. It was pure. He wondered if this is what righteous smelled like. But it was more than that. Then a word he'd heard once in his life came to mind. Innocence. These boys were innocent. This was special. This was precious. From the same shop that the boys had just exited came a man. When Stupid saw him, his heart leapt. This man was tall, strong, and confident. He wore olive drab fatigues, black combat boots, and a black t-shirt. On the t-shirt was a bright red cross. It looked as if it had been splattered against the shirt, as if it were drawn in blood. It was Templar, the man that he was supposed to meet, the man who would give him his mission. Immediately, Templar positioned himself between the boys and the black parade. He watched with steely eyes as it moved down Main Street and out into the far end of town. Stupid sniffed him. While he smelled strong, confident, and at peace, he also smelled dangerous, but not against the boys. This man was a warrior. Templar gave an angry grimace at the parade as it disappeared into the darkness. Then, in answer to the red-haired boy, he said, "No, son, you don't need to help these poor folks. First responders are on the way." And this was true. Sirens rang out all around them. When it was clear that the black parade was gone and the boys were safe, Templar squatted down in front of Stupid and scratched him behind the ears. "Hey there, fella. My name is Templar. I've been waiting on you, boy." Templar had a deep, comforting, brave voice. It made Stupid feel brave, too. Stupid wagged his tail at him. Then Templar glanced at the boys, who were now in quick conversation about what they had just witnessed. Templar interrupted them. "Rory, Stevie, I want to introduce you to someone." The boys turned their attention to Stupid, and their eyes shot wide again, this time in delight. They squatted down and began petting him. The fair-skinned boy said, I don't see a collar, Mr. Templar. Templar had shown up in town a few weeks back. He walked with the confidence of a samurai who had fought 1,000 bloody battles and lived to write haiku about the resplendent beauty of the world. And everyone genuinely liked him. The men would sit at Winona's Waffle Hut and talk about how they wanted to be him. The women would drink coffee and talk about how they felt safe when he was near. And Rory and Stevie liked him because he had been teaching them some basic martial arts, and because he told the most epic stories of ancient battles between knights and dragons. Templar nodded at the fair-skinned boy. That's because he belongs to you boys now, Stevie. The other boy, Rory, spoke with a pronounced New Orleans drawl. What you mean, Mr. Templar? Rory Boudreaux had only been living in Nevermore Hollows for about a year. He had moved from New Orleans after his dad got killed by a voodoo priestess. He and his mom, Antoinette, lived in one of the trailers at the Pink Flamingos trailer park on the outskirts of town. In fact, he lived a street over from his best friend in the whole world, Stevie Muse, who lived with his mom, Lily, and also didn't have a dad because he had left the day he was born. What I mean by this, boys, Templar said, with a big smile on his face, is that this here dog has come a long way to be with you. He turned his attention to Stupid. Isn't that right, boy? Stupid wagged his tail and gave a hopeful chuff. The boys didn't ask Templar how he knew that the dog had come such a long way just to be with them. They simply accepted the mystery and wonder of the world and in unison said, Cool. Then Stevie asked, What's his name? Templar, still squatting in front of the dog and stroking his head, said, Oh, the name he was given isn't the name that matches his spirit. And I think he'd be happy with whatever you boys decide to call him. Isn't that right, Pooch? The Pooch gave a happy chuff. His heart was full of hope and happiness and wonder. He wagged his tail faster. He couldn't wait to hear what these boys would call him. Then Templar turned serious. To the dog, he said, You faced some scary things on your journey, didn't you, boy? But that changed you, made you strong, brave, and smart. Templar shot a glance at the glee on Stevie's and Rory's faces. Then, looking back at the dog, he said, You are going to be truly and wholly loved. But these boys like to get into trouble, and it is your duty to protect them at all cost. Do you understand? The dog locked his eyes onto Templar's. He gave the most serious look he could muster. Then he gave a low, protective growl as indication of his understanding about his new duty. Templar nodded, smiled, then ruffled the fur on the dog's head. Good boy. He stood and turned to the boys. He's got some superficial wounds that you two need to address, but he'll be okay. Now, I have to leave town for a while, but I'll be back when I'm needed the most. Stevie and Rory were sad to see their new friend go, but their sadness was overshadowed by the joy of having their very own dog. We understand, sir, Stevie said. Yeah, Rory added. We sure can't wait for you to get back and tell us some more stories. Templar gave a satisfied smile. And while sirens blared and first responders arrived on the scene, he motioned for them to leave. Jack and his parade of demons are gone for now, he said. You won't encounter them on your way home. Now, go, have adventures, but be vigilant and be at peace. Rory and Stevie got astride their rusty bikes. Their faces beamed in the glow of the antique lamplight. and to the sound of sirens and people in distress, they rode off down the street toward the trailer park where they lived. Their new dog padded between them. For a moment, Templar watched them and smiled at their excited voices as they discussed the name they would choose for their new dog. "What you think we should call him?" Rory said. "Spike?" "Nah," Stevie replied. "He doesn't look like a Spike. Besides, that's a name for a Doberman. What about we call him something really cool, like after one of our favorite characters in a comic book or a movie?" Rory considered this idea. "You mean like we be calling him Dutch from the Predator movie?" "Yeah," Stevie replied. Or like maybe McCready from John Carpenter's The Thing." "Now that has a nice ring to it," Rory said. "But we don't need to rush. Let's take our time and make sure it fits." Templar watched him pedal off into the night. He didn't know what would happen to the boys or their new protector. That wasn't part of his own personal mission. His mission was to make the introduction. And now that was behind him, he strode off down the street among the chaos of the inflicted toward the parking lot where he had parked his Harley. He had to go, for now, but he would come back, and when he did, he would be prepared for war.